All right, so this is the sixth message in the series that we have called More Like Jesus. And what we're doing is we're looking at Jesus' life and some of the things he says and some of the things he does. And from that, we're learning how our lives can look more like Jesus. Well, not physically look like Jesus, but in how we live our life and the choices that we make. But even if you did want to look like Jesus, the truth is that Jesus actually didn't look anything like this. Did you know that? Historically, it's unlikely that he had long hair, just historically. Historians say that Jewish men in the first century, they generally kept their hair relatively short and well-groomed. And also, I hate to tell you tall people, but based upon skeletal remains of first century Judea, the average male was about 5'5". And we know that Jesus was perfect in every way. And that includes how tall he probably was. So for all of you who have struggled with how tall you are in becoming like Jesus, I know it's hard, but you're trying to be more like Jesus, but you know, sometimes I know that it's a struggle if you're freakishly tall and above 5'5". And so I am putting you on my prayer list that you could become. I'm praying for you. But really, the other thing also that I hate to tell you, but Jesus wasn't white either. Jesus was actually a Middle Eastern Jew, so his skin tone was not Caucasian, as a lot of the Renaissance paintings depict. He would have had olive or darker brown skin. And so the tall Caucasian Jesus with long flowing hair is not anything like what Jesus actually looked like. And actually from biblical prophecy, we get this idea as well. Because Isaiah prophesies about the coming Messiah, and here's what he says about him. He says he would have no beauty or majesty to attract people to him, no physical beauty or majesty. You see, through the ages, all cultures have depicted Jesus as what was attractive to them and to their culture. And pretty much all cultures want to make Jesus their own, right? I mean, we know that Jesus was a Middle Eastern Jew, but all cultures have claimed Jesus. I mean, we have Caucasian Jesus, yes, we have Black Jesus, we have Latino Jesus, we have Asian Jesus, we have Native American Jesus, and we have Indian Jesus, Thomas. And I'm sure that there are a ton more cultures that depicted him as what their culture identified with. Every culture wants to identify with Jesus. But the truth is that Jesus was an average-looking Jewish man. And for some reason, no matter what the culture, everybody thought Jesus could throw a mean curveball for some reason. I'm not sure what that's about. But according to prophecy, he looked like the average Jewish man, Isaiah said. And so it says he was average looking. He had no physical beauty or majesty to attract us to him. In fact, it says that nothing in his appearance would be that something that we would desire. And so if our series graphic was actually historically correct, it would actually look something like this, an average looking Jewish carpenter. But here's what's amazing. Here's what's amazing about this average looking Jewish construction worker that had nothing on the outside who would make us want to follow him. It's that millions of people would. They would give their lives to him. They would dedicate their lives to him, and they would follow him for eternity. You see, Jesus was an amazing leader, but his leadership wasn't from the outside in. It was something completely different from what we think of when we picture somebody tall and attractive, somebody that stands out physically as a leader. Jesus' leadership was completely different. And the more you study the life of Jesus, the more you actually see that he is the greatest leadership role model of all time. Because although he had ultimate power, he was born as a man. He laid down that power as an average man, and led with pure, well, let's not go there yet. I'm going to get to how he led. But some of you may be thinking, well, Micah, if we're talking about leadership, I can kind of tune out and scroll because I'm not really a leader. And if that's you, I want you to lean in. Yes, you are. You are. Because as leadership guru John Maxwell says, leadership is influence. Nothing more and nothing less. And we all have, every single person here, you have influence somewhere with someone. Now, some of us have more influence than others, but every single person has influence. See, leadership isn't just for CEOs and officials and people that have top positions on the org chart. Leadership is for it's for single moms and stay-at-home parents. And parents, if you're a parent, do you have any idea of the influence that you have on your children? It's unprecedented. For somebody here today, your greatest contribution in this world may not be anything you do, it may be someone you develop. That's the level of leadership that you have. Now, if you're a teenager or maybe you're a student here today, you have influence as well. You would not believe the influence that you have on the others around you in your school, in your work, in your neighborhood. If you're a teacher or you're a coach here today, do you realize that when people are asked who had the greatest influence on their life, 80 to 85% say it was a teacher or it was a coach. So listen, we all have influence and leadership somewhere. Whether you believe it or not, you do. And so today, as we learn to become more like Jesus, we're going to learn to lead like Jesus with that influence. And Jesus' leadership style, it's best summarized in one chapter of the Bible, and that's where we're going to go today. So if you would turn to Mark chapter 10, paper or digital, you can go to Mark chapter 10, and let me just go ahead and set the stage for where we're going to pick up in Mark today. Jesus, it's his last week of his life. He's getting ready to go to the cross, and in this last week, he's going to go to the cross to die for the sins of man. And then he's going to resurrect, and he's going to join his Father in heaven. But for this last week, he's going to be turning over the leadership of his ministry to 12 disciples. And he's been pouring his life into these guys for 3 years. And finally, he knows it's time. And as we're going to find out, their big hurdle is the same hurdle that our culture deals with today. And that is how they think about leadership and who is important. So, Jesus and his crew, they're headed for the big city of Jerusalem, and he begins to lay out for them the week's itinerary. He's very clear. Verse 33, he says, so he tells them, we're going to go to Jerusalem, and he says, so here's what's going to happen. Jesus was very organized. He had an itinerary. And he says, the Son of Man, he's talking about himself, I will be delivered over to the chief priests and the teachers of the law. Now, these are the people that had the corrupt leaders in the Jewish government that had been trying to kill him. So the disciples are like, And then he says, they will condemn me to death. They will hand me over to the Gentiles. That was the Romans who crucified people on the side of the road. And he said, and they're going to mock me, spit on me, flog me, and kill me. So at this point, they're like, But he says, spoiler alert, stay strong, because 3 days later, I'm going to rise. I'm going to rise again. Now, that seems pretty clear, right? To all of us. He lays it out like an agenda. They're gonna condemn me, check. They're gonna mock me, check. There's gonna be spitting, check. Flogging, check. Killing, check. 3 days, and I'm back. You guys got it? Everybody. And so he would have asked his congregation, his disciples, you guys got it? Did you know that not one single disciple got it? Not one of them. They're like, what are you talking about, Jesus? You're not going to die. That's not going to happen. I mean, look, you just raised Lazarus from the dead, and now you're telling us that you're going to die. Listen, Jesus, I know you make up those cool stories and those parables and things, and you use all the symbolism. This is one of those things, right? You're not going to die. I mean, why do you think we've been following you? Not because you're going to die. You're going to be a king. You're the Messiah. That's why we're here. And then when you get real powerful and rich, you're going to overthrow our oppressors, Rome. This is what they're thinking. And then two of them, James and John, the sons of Zebedee, this is two of the 12, they come to him and they said, "Teacher, we want you to do for us whatever we ask." Now, parents, when your kids come to you, when that child comes to you and they say, "Mom, Dad, I'm going to ask you something, and whatever it is, I just need you to say yes." Is that a good thing or a bad thing? Is that normally good or bad? You already know the answer to that. And I think that Jesus already knows, but he kind of plays along, okay? And so he says, "All right, what do you want? What do you want me to do for you?" So they reply, so when you become King Jesus, can one of us sit at your right and the other at your left in your glory? It's like in the middle of him explaining everything in this horrible week, his own death. It's almost like they have ADHD, like they can't focus. Okay, Jesus, we heard you about all the flogging and the killing and the spitting and all that kind of stuff, and we'll probably hang back during that part, you know. But whenever you work the miracle, and then you become king, and then you're super powerful, could we have the top two positions in your administration, please? Cool? Can we do that? And Jesus is so patient with these guys. Watch what he says next. Guys, you don't know what you're asking. Can you drink my cup? Do you really know what you're asking? Can you sacrifice what I'm about to sacrifice? Can you drink of my cup? Because Jesus isn't getting ready to ascend to a throne. He's ascending to a cross. And the people to his right and left, they're going to be crucified, literally. Like, do you know what you're asking? Can you handle this leadership? And so they answer, "Yep, we sure can. We're down with the power, with the kingdom, the throne, the fame, all the stuff. We want some of that, Jesus." But then, when the other 10 heard about this, they became indignant. They got ticked off. They were upset. They got mad because these two went to Jesus. And I don't think that they were mad that these two asked. They were mad that they didn't ask first. And so, Peter's like, "Hey, hang on a second. He named me Rock. I'm Peter, right? I should have the top position." And Judas is like, "Hey, I handle all the money. Like, I'm the CFO. Shouldn't I be like, shouldn't that put me over the treasury department or something in this new kingdom?" They're all fighting about who's going to be the greatest leader in Jesus' kingdom. And so what does Jesus do next? Now remember, they're on the road on the way to Jerusalem. It's the last week. So it says in verse 42, so Jesus calls them all together, and he's like, "Children." He held like a powwow right there. It was a come to Jesus moment right there. To impart the most powerful leadership principle you'll ever hear in your life. The difference between good and bad leadership. He says this. He says, "You know that those who are regarded as rulers or leaders of the Gentiles, everybody around you that you see leading, they lord it over them." In other words, they boss them around. And their high officials, they exercise authority over them. What he's saying is, look, guys, you see it all around you, from Caesar to the Senate, to the magistrates, to the local governors, to even our priests and the religious system, the Sanhedrin. Every single leader around you that you see, they have one leadership style. They put everybody down to lift themselves up. to serve themselves. They put everybody down around them to give themselves all the benefits, all the prestige, all the credit, all the power, all the resources, all the money. That's how their leadership works. Everything goes to them. And the disciples at this point are thinking, duh, that's why we want some of this. That's why we're following you. And what Jesus says next, every single one of us that follow Jesus, we should memorize these 4 words. This should be etched into our minds when it comes to leadership. We should memorize them. We should drill it into our brain over and over and over when it comes to our influence and what we do with it. Jesus says every single leader, you see how they lead? They put everybody else down to lift themselves up. It's all about them. And then watch what he says next. Not so with you. Not so with you. True leadership that changes the world, influence that changes the world, it's different. Don't try to become great by power and authority, is what Jesus is saying. He says there is a different and a more effective and powerful way. And then he says this. He says, instead, whoever wants to become great among you. And I imagine that he might have paused at that moment and looked at all of his disciples and said, do any of you guys want to be great? And 2 of them already showed their hand, right? But I imagine he looks at all the others who were mad at these 2 and said, come on, let's be honest. Who all wants to have significance? Who all wants to make a difference with their lives? He looks at the disciples and he says, how many of you guys want to become great? And I would imagine all of their hands would shoot up. I want to be great. And for us here today and for us that are online, there's something in all of us that wants to be great, that wants to be significant. We want our lives to matter. And so all of our hands would have been up as well. And some of you might be thinking, yeah, Micah, I know this is a trick. This is a trick question because it's a bad thing to want to be great, right? We're supposed to be humble. And yes, you are, but lean in. Jesus never said it was bad to want to be great. In fact, I would go as far to say Jesus wants you to be great. He wants you to make a difference. He wants you to change the world and make a difference with your influence in your family. See your company culture change. See the people at your church, in your church and at your school and on your team change. He wants you to be great. And so he says, whoever wants to become great, and that should be all of us, watch this, must be your servant. I knew there was a catch. Jesus is, there he goes again. He's always saying things that don't make any difference or any sense at all. Servant? Jesus? The servant only cares about other people, not themselves and their greatness. Servants have to work. They're not about other people, or they're about themselves, not about themselves. And Jesus says that's exactly right. And he goes deeper and he says, and whoever wants to be first, in other words, the greatest of the great, they must be a slave of all. They must be everybody's slave. You want to be great? You want to be first? You've got to be a slave to all. And when he says slave, it doesn't mean what we think of when we think about the atrocities in our country's past. When he says slave, what he's talking about is somebody whose purpose is determined by their master. So if you're a follower of Jesus, you have a master, you have a Lord. And Jesus says, whoever wants to be great must be a servant. And the disciples at this point are thinking, like, Jesus, nobody leads that way around here. Like, what are you talking about? And Jesus is saying, guys, have you been watching for the last 3 years? What have you seen me do? For even the Son of Man, for even Jesus, did not come to be served, but to serve. And even more than that, to give his life as a ransom for others. And in this statement, Jesus draws the line between every great leader you've ever had and every terrible leader that you've ever had. It's either somebody that came to be served or somebody who came to serve. And the worst leaders in the world, whether it's governments or organizations or even mothers and fathers and families and pastors, the worst leaders in the world, their motive is to be served. Serve me because I'm more important than you. I'm God's anointed, so you must serve me. But good leaders come to serve. Think about it this way. For those of us that are married, who's the hardest person to serve? Don't say it. I helped you out there. The person that's hardest to serve sometimes, the person that we have the hardest time serving is their spouse. And sometimes, this is going to hurt, sometimes what's wrong with their marriages is we're all about serving ourselves and being served. Now, if I came and I give you the microphone today and I brought you up on stage and I said, talk about the person in your life that has influenced you the most for the good, I can guarantee you would talk about somebody that served you. You talk about a mom or a dad or a grandparent or an aunt or an uncle that gave their life. They laid down their own time, they sacrificed for you, and they gave and served you. You talk about a teacher that when others are saying you're never going to amount to anything, that teacher that said, don't you listen to them, don't you believe them, and maybe even risk their reputation at that time to invest in you. You would talk about a coach that stayed late after practice and saw something in you that nobody else saw. You talk about a leader at your workplace that gave you opportunities when, to be honest, you don't even know that you deserved it. And they invested in you, and they served you. And Paul sums it up in Philippians. He says it this way: do nothing out of selfish ambition or vain conceit. Do nothing to serve yourself. Don't be selfish. Instead, in humility, be more like Jesus and value others above yourself. Not looking to your own interests, but to the interests of other people. And this is what Jesus is teaching those that he's getting ready to leave in charge of this whole thing. And they, using this, will influence the whole planet. Fast forward a week later. They get to Jerusalem, and Jesus rides in on a donkey. And people are waving palm branches, and they're declaring him king as he enters. Thousands of people line the streets, cheering and chanting for him as he and his disciples walk into the city. And you couldn't imagine the emotions that the disciples were experiencing at that moment. It's like they were rock stars. And his disciples, they must have thought, this is it. We were right. He's going to be king. We're going to have the top spots in the entire world. We're going to have all the power, all the prestige, all the money. It's all coming our way. This is influence and power. And we are going to be great because he's great and we're following him. But Jesus doesn't declare himself king. And there's no prestige. And there's no money. In fact, Jesus, he does something that takes all of them by total surprise. They go to the place that they're staying, and Jesus takes off his robe, and he puts a towel around his waist, and they gasp as he kneels down and starts to wash every single one of their feet. In our culture, that sounds strange, but in their culture, you can't imagine how radical this was. This was the job for the lowest of servants. It wasn't a servant's job, it was the lowest of the servants. It was a nasty, nasty job because everybody wore sandals and their feet would get dirty from walking the streets. And I'm not talking about walking the streets of Raleigh or of Wake Forest. We're talking about people that walked the Roman city streets with waste and sewage and dung in the streets. Their feet are filthy beyond what you can imagine. And Jesus walks up to each one of them. And they say, "You're not washing my feet." But he does. And washing 12 people's feet, it would take a lot of time. And I think it had to be eerily silent as he one by one washed the dirt and the dung off their feet. And he's got it on his hands. And it's in the bowl. And it smells. And they don't know what to do because he just served them in the lowest manner possible. One by one, he shows them, this is what I've been telling you to do. And so after he was finished, it's silent. He gets up. He looks at every single one of his disciples, and he says, "Do you have any idea what I just did for you? You call me teacher and Lord, and rightly so, because that's who I am. And now that I, your leader, your Lord and teacher, have washed your feet, if I'm your Lord, and I got on my knees to wash your feet, I want you to go out and I want you to do the same for each other. You also should wash one another's feet." And if you want to know the most powerful way to be great, if you want to know how to have significance in life, how to build a strong family, how to make an impact on your world, it's this lesson from Jesus. Because in John 15, he says this, he sums it up: "Greater love has nobody than this, that they lay down one's life for their friends." To lay down our own ambitions, my own conceit, my own desires, that we lay down our fears, our pride, that we lay down our offenses when that other person says something out of ignorance. Why? So that we can lay our lives down for each other, just like Jesus did. That we could be more like him, that we could serve each other like he told us to, that we show each other love and grace even when they don't deserve it. And man, it is so upside down. It's so counterculture. But when we look back and we think about the people that shaped our lives, you'll find this lesson from Jesus shining bright in their actions. And this is what I want to ask us all to do this week as we prepare for Thanksgiving this week and for the Christmas season. I'm telling you, you're going to have a chance to be like Jesus and prefer others, serve others, love others. It could be in the traffic. It probably will be in the traffic. It could be in the store. That person tried to cut in front of you. It could be in your church. It could be with that annoying family member that always brings up politics and their one-sided view they got from their news source. You know who I'm talking about. Hopefully you're not that person. Here's what I want to challenge you to do. Serve somebody else. Jesus modeled it. The disciples followed that example, and the world was changed. And how many of you know we desperately need this in our world today, and the people that present themselves as their leaders or are wannabe leaders? We can take John 15. We can make this a part of our lives. John 15, greater love has nobody than this, to lay down one's life for one's friends. And we can pray this over ourselves every day leading up to Thanksgiving like this. Declare the word of God over yourself in prayer. Do it with me. Because Jesus laid his life down to serve me today, I lay my life down to serve others. Could you imagine waking up every morning with a destiny for greatness, with a destiny for significance, because this is what's in your heart. You are more like Jesus. Pray it with me again. Because Jesus laid his life down to serve me, today I lay down my life to serve others. Will you stand with me?